Okay, so today we are talking about how to solve quadratic equations by factoring. So last time we talked about factoring quadratics, right? And now we're solving. So you guys got to know the difference. Before we couldn't solve the quadratics that we were working on because they weren't equations. So they were something like this, like you know, 2x squared, 2x squared plus 5x minus 2. You can't find out what x is. It's just like how if you have an expression like 3x and you try to find out what is x, you don't know what is x. But if you know that it's 3x is equal to 9, then you can solve for x, right? Now you know what x is. So you can only solve if you have an equal sign, like an equation, okay? So today we do have equations that we can solve, okay? So before we solve the quadratics, there is something that you guys have to understand. That is the property of zero. All right, sometimes they call it the zeroth property. Um, it means that if you have two numbers like a times b, okay, it could be like 5 times 10, 8 times 2, whatever. But if you have two numbers that multiply to be zero, then what do you know about these numbers? Okay, like if I say a is 1, what does b have to be? B has to be 0, right? And if I say a is any number, b has to be 0 for it to work. Like 1,000 times 0 is 0, 99 times 0 is 0. And now if b is any other random number, like 500, then a has to be 0. So if you have two things that multiply to each other equal to 0, then each of them has to be equal to 0. So a has to be equal to 0 or b has to be equal to 0. This is the property of 0. Okay, so a is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0 if you have a times b equals to 0. If you have both numbers and neither one of them is 0, then it doesn't work. So we're going to use that property to solve the quadratics. Now the quadratics, it can come in the form of factored, right? Because you guys know we factored them. So they can look like this. 2x minus 5 times x plus 7 is equal to 0. Well, there's a quadratic equation. This is a quadratic because you know if you multiply them back in, you have a quadratic looking thing, like an x squared. And you factor that, it looks like this. Now, here you have two things that multiply to be equal to 0. So let's just make this one the red one and this one the blue one, okay? All you do is take the blue, make it equal to 0, or and then take the red and make that equal to 0. So I have 2x minus 5 is equal to 0, or I have x plus 7 is equal to 0. And you solve for that, right? So this one, x has to be equal to negative 7, and this one, you add 5 to both sides. So 2x is equal to 5, and then x is equal to 5 halves. So x is equal to this or that. Okay, so you have two answers that x could be. X could be two numbers. Okay, and this equation will work. So you have two solutions instead of one. All right, that's how to solve a quadratic in factored form. Okay, now the interesting part is what happens if they're not factored, right? So I have x squared equals to 9x minus 8. Well, here you have a quadratic equation. Notice that there's an equal sign, so it's an equation. You can solve for it. So to use the property of 0, you have to make it equal to 0. So I'm going to have to move everything to one side. So I subtract 9x and add 8 to both sides. I have x squared minus 9x plus 8 equal to 0. So once it's equal to 0, you try to make it into two things that multiply to be equal to 0, right? So if you factor that, you guys remember how to factor, right? You factor that, you get x minus 8 and x minus 1. All of that is equal to 0. So you take each of them and you set that equal to 0. So I have, x minus 8 equal to 0, or x minus 1 is equal to 0. And then you solve for that, you get x is equal to 8, or x is equal to 1. So remember, the or just means that x could be this or that. That means they both work. Okay. I'm just going to do a couple more and then we'll be done. All right. Example number 3, I have 7 x squared minus 31x minus 20 equal to 0. So this one is already equal to 0, so it's good. You don't have to move anything. You just have to factor it. Okay, so I'll go over the factoring one more time. So if you guys are still kind of iffy on that, you guys can check that out. Okay, so A, B, and C. All right, remember A is 7, B is negative 31, and C is negative 20. So you take A times C, you get 7 times negative 20, you get negative 140. All right, and then you do 1, negative 140. Does that add up to be negative 31? No. Negative 1, positive 140, that doesn't work. 2, negative 70, obviously doesn't work. Negative 2, positive 70. Add them up, does not work. 3 does not go in. You can try 4, negative 35. Oh, there you go. That works. Okay. And you factor that. Then that becomes 4x minus 35x. Okay, and then the 7x squared comes down. A plus there because it's positive 4, right? A negative there because it's negative 35. And then minus 20. And then I factor the first two. Make sure you put a plus sign. And factor the second two. So I can only take out an x here because 7 and 4 have nothing in common. So take out an x. I have 7x plus 4 here. And here I can take out a negative 5. Then I have 7x plus 4 equal to 0. So these guys look the same. That they're one factor, 7x plus 4. And the other one is x minus 5. And then to solve for that, you set each of them equal to 0. So I'm going to do that right here. So x minus 5 is equal to 0. That means x is equal to 5. That's 1. And then you have 7x plus 4 is equal to 0. Subtract 4 from both sides. 7x is equal to negative 4 divided by 7. X is equal to negative 4/7. Okay, this or that. Those are your solutions. Okay. I'll do one more and then we'll be done. So I have 2x squared plus 7x is equal to negative 3. Again, you have to make it equal to 0, so I'm going to add 3 to both sides. I have 2x squared plus 7x plus 3 is equal to 0. Factor that. You remember A, B, and C. 2, 7, 3. 2 times 3 is 6. What numbers multiply to be 6 and add to be 7? I got 1 and 6. That works. So 2x squared plus 1x plus 6x plus 3 equals to 0. So you factor this, factor that. I get x times 2x plus 1. Factor out a 3. I have 2x plus 1 inside. So my factors are x plus 3, 2x plus 1. Then you set them equal to 0. X plus 3 is equal to 0. Or 2x plus 1 equals to 0. So this one, x is equal to negative 3. Or subtract 1, 2x is equal to negative 1. X is equal to negative 1/2.